Johnston. I'm the manager for the Utah Center for the Book. Today, I'm excited to share with you a chat between David Lindes, who's a local writer and songwriter. You can find his work here. This is his latest book. And Ruben Degollado, who joined us from Texas to talk about his book, The Family Izquierdo. It's a great conversation about writing and language and all of that great stuff. Thank you for Weller Books for having us, to all of our funders at Utah Humanities, and I hope you enjoy.
So, the thing about the buses in Guatemala City is that they have this odd little quirk about them. If you're under the age of 10, you set one foot in one, and you have to pee. That's how it works. That's just how these things work. And if you're in the lower class in Guatemala, that's how you get around, man. You ride the bus everywhere. This was the story of my life. Everywhere we went, it felt like forever. Every time I got on, I was sure I would die before I found the next restaurant, you know? And that's why the day I left Guatemala at 9 years old was really special. My uncle had a friend who had a truck, like a late 70s Datsun, forest green, and we got to ride in the back of that thing to the airport. So I'm in the back of that with huge vinyl suitcases and my older sister, and I feel like British royalty. You know, like I would wave at the common man as I pass him by, you know? And it was good. It was really because I was headed to the U.S., you know, and for a 9-year-old Guatemalan kid, the U.S. means 3 things. Number 1, $5 Ninja Turtle action figures. Number 2, an entire nation that from sea to shining sea looks like the set of the Wonder Years. And number 3, someday before I died, I would own a Nintendo. Now, before we go on, I need to give you a little backstory on my Tío Willy. My uncle was a veterinarian, but we're not talking, you know, puppies and kittens and the occasional bunny. He was the veterinarian in residence for a caiman farm. Again, 9-year-old Guatemalan kid, you know, caiman vet uncle. It's pretty good. It's like my uncle's better than your uncle kind of situation. And he was my hero, absolutely my hero. Now, he was there living on this caiman farm for a couple of years, and everyone kind of had their own little, I don't know, little housing bit. You know, it was like a shed. Everybody lived in their own little shed. And one night, one of the farmhands got out of this world drunk, and his wife kicked him out of their shed. And so he is now wandering the caiman farm, way too tipsy for his own good, and he falls into one of the lagoons. And there is a splash, and there's a struggle, and he manages to get himself out and back onto dry ground, which is commendable, but when he looks for his left hand, it's gone. Oh my word. He runs to his shack, he knocks the door, pounding the door, his wife opens, you know, "What are you doing here? I kicked you out of here." All he has to do is this. They call for my uncle, he's the closest thing they have to a doctor nearby, he stops the bleeding. I don't know how the rest of this happened, but the short version of the story is that my uncle has that caiman skull on his bookshelf, and he calls it manitas. Which means little hand. Yeah. Now, Tío Willy was at the airport the day I left Guatemala, and he was uncharacteristically somber. That wasn't his style. And I remember he got down on one knee to give me a hug. And he cradled my head with his hand, and he pressed his cheek against mine. And on my cheek, I could feel his tears. me that something was going on that I did not know about, because, you know, Cayman Dr. Theo Wheatley is crying. It's hit me since that really that day I was blinded. I was blinded by hope. You know, I was so into where I was going that I could not for the life of me see what I was leaving behind. And when I think back on Theo Wheatley crying at the airport, I have often thought to myself, damn it, I should have cried with him. This song is called I Should Have Cried.
Okay, great. Okay, so you have 27 in credits. So when you come next time, just let
I should have cried when your tears stained cheek brushed mine, and the airport echoed wide. What I didn't know was goodbye. Should have cried when I walked aboard the plane and watched what made my life fade, as if the clouds below were her grave. All I could see was what I was, a life of red and white and blue. I didn't know that I was losing too. Losing you. Oh, I should have cried. I should have cried, but sometimes pain takes years to bloom, till one quiet afternoon, when you're swallowed whole by old wounds. All I could see was what I'd won, a life of red and white and blue. I didn't know that I was losing too. Losing you. Oh, I should have cried. I should have cried. I should have cried. Oh, I should have cried.
Thank you, David.
I'll do it for you.
I'm gonna actually have. I'm gonna get this. Send this to, Fiverr or Fiverr. they've got editors on there. We'll turn this around tomorrow, and it actually looks amazing.
I'm so glad.
we're gonna rock this.
That's awesome.
We're gonna rock this. It's gonna be cool.
And that you gotta write that. Have you written that down?
I have.
That's a great story. I mean, for memoir, for a short story, for a novel,
Yeah.
for the beginning of a novel. Wow.
Thank you. So I have an album that I'm releasing in the spring. We're going to turn it into an audiobook and put in a story for each song. That's the idea for now.
That's really good.
But it's in the very, very early stages.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Are you reading anything? You gonna read?
I just tell stuff.
Okay. Good. Hey, you're a great storyteller.
Thank you.
Very good. Very much. I have to write things down. So I try to tell good stories like just off the cuff, but it just doesn't work out. So I'm Ruben, and my book, I have two books. The first book is called Throw. This book is the Family Izquierdo, and it's done pretty well. And this is a book that is about a family, the Izquierdo family, living in South Texas, Rio Grande Valley, McAllen, Texas, living along the border. And they have experienced a lot of things that they can't explain, illnesses, whether there's mental maladies, mental illness in the family, there's tragedies that are kind of all happening. And in their way of trying to explain what's happening, they attribute it to a curse. And the curse is against the entire family, and it is, I won't tell you if it's a real curse or not, but there definitely is a person in the neighborhood who is jealous of them. His name is Emiliano Contreras, and he is jealous of their success, jealous of how well they've done. The parents have come from Mexico. They've started a painting and drywall business that has been relatively successful. Many children, 10 children, and those children have children. So by all rights, an American success story that this neighbor is jealous of them and has purported to curse them. Well, the book opens up, the main narrative opens up, where they do indeed find a curse. The person they're blaming for this curse is Emiliano Contreras, as I said, and I'm going to open it up, and this is a story. It was originally published as a short story in a literary magazine in 1997, Hayden's Fair Review, and it is the first chapter. And just as by way of kind of showing you, these stories, this book has been with me for like 25 years, so it's been a long time for me to write this book. I didn't just crank it out one day. I was writing these stories back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So this is Turroco. Mama shook me awake, then led me into the pickup, and I was staggering, half lucid, wanting to be picked up, but knowing I was too old for that now. I sat between them, Mama and Papa. Every minute or so, a car would face off with us, light up my parents' faces, then pass and leave us in the darkness of those hours before the sun comes up, what we called La Madrugada. All I knew was that we were going to my grandparents' house in the Zavala, but neither of my parents said why. Are you sure about this? Mama asked. Pues tenemos que hacer algo, Papa said. Yeah, Gonzalo, but we aren't doing right, she said, her face lit up by an incoming car. Mi mamá lo conoce. Papa's face again faded into shadow. Yeah, viejo, your mother knows him, but that doesn't mean anything. Es un hombre de Dios. But is he even a priest? Tú sabes bien que no, Victoria. ¿Y por qué me preguntas otra vez? I'm asking because I want to remind you that he isn't. This was the way they spoke when they were in front of me. Apá in Spanish when he didn't want me to fully understand what he was saying, and Mama responding in English, translating what he had just said because she wanted to make sure I kept our heritage. Language was very important to Mama, both Spanish and the tongue of angels. Apá clicked his tongue against his teeth like he always did when Mama said something like that, which was often. Even though my mother was younger than my father, she was never afraid to translate what he said to me or call him out when she believed my father was wrong. They did not speak again until we got to Papatavo and Abuelita's house on the south side of McAllen in the Zavala neighborhood where Apá grew up, just 7 miles north of the border. As we walked through the gate, I thought of my grandfather. Sleep had always been difficult for him, but for a few months ago, he had begun sleepwalking and suffering insomnia, in which he would walk around the house, agitated, looking for things he could not explain. One night, he had discovered a rotting goat hoof and a rooster foot buried in the front yard. My grandfather believed these things were a curse meant to ensure that the devil would either keep him from sleeping or walk through his dreams whenever he did. Soon after, our papatavo had been sent to Charter Palms for evaluation. When this became too hard on the family and papatavo still wasn't better, he bounced around from nursing home to nursing home all over the Rio Grande Valley, because when he got bad, none of the orderlies could control him or calm him down. Only my father was able to ease his nerves. On this night of our visit, papatavo was staying with my Uncle Braulio. My father had decided to take advantage of his absence, hiring a curandero to help my grandfather by doing a limpia of the yard, a clearing of any curses against us. When we got to papatavo and Abuelita's house, Abuelita and a man were at the table talking. I could see Abuelita through the burglar bars and the window screen, sitting there staring into a cup, listening to the man but not saying much in return. Abuelita got up quickly when she heard us get closer to the door, as if she were relieved for the interruption. "¿Cómo está mi gancito?" she said, grabbing my face with her small hands and kissing it. She was the only one who called me gancito, her little goose, while everyone else in the family called me Little Gonzalo, as I bore my father's name. "Salúdalos, mijo." My father always reminded me to greet my elders. A way was not enough. I had to hug and kiss my grandmothers and aunts. It was the lowest form of disrespect not to give your elder woman an abrazo y un beso when saying hello or goodbye, especially your grandmother. For the men, you had to shake their hands. In his thinking, a pattern of giving anything less merited a nalgada. And since my father's hands were like sandpaper, I always gave my saludos. So I shook the stranger's hand. "Mucho gusto," he said to everyone shyly. The curandero's matted hair looked much like my papatavo's hair after he had been wearing his Stetson all day. Papa and Mama sat as my grandmother served them her coffee, which always smelled delicious. Although I wasn't allowed to drink any, my mother often let me sneak a drink while the elders were talking. Papa was saying that the Brujo Contreras down the block was the reason for the evil that had befallen the family. He attributed the violence, miscarriages, breakdowns, accidents, anxieties, and sadness in our family to this man. My older cousin Cirilo had almost been shot in a drive-by and had lost one of his friends instead. My Uncle Wally had been a school bus mechanic in the district where all those kids died in a bus accident, and though he was cleared of any negligence, he always blamed himself for not servicing the brakes better, which was apparently one of the contributing factors in the tragedy. Evil spirits like these only understand greater power, the men said in pure Spanish. Pure meaning real Mexican from Mexico Spanish, not like our Ocho mix and match Spanish we use on our side of the river. I have helped your mother light the candles at the altar. He meant the altar in my tía Susana's room. It was at this altar that we then said the rosary on our knees, all except for my mother, who was sitting on the bed praying silently to herself. I had to keep shifting my weight from knee to knee because my grandmother's floor was hard with no carpet. Abuelita led the prayer, most of which I did not understand, and my father and the stranger repeated. Of course, Mama did not share the prayers. A few years earlier, Mama had started going to a full gospel church, but even before that, she had never knelt in front of the Virgin or any of the saints, not even at Christmas. After Abuelita had gone through all of the beads of the rosary, which seemed to take forever, the man asked Papa if he was ready. Brujos bury objects in the yard that stay with the family and curse them without them knowing it. These entierros are sometimes possessions of the family. We must find the entierro and burn it to cleanse the house. But I must warn you, evil will be unleashed when we burn this. The demons will be leaving, but looking for somewhere to rest. The curandero held his own rosary, thumbing the beads. "Está listo?" Sí, my father answered, while looking at us, telling us he was ready to do what he needed to for the family. With that, he walked out and left us in Tia Susana's room, which was lit only by the religious candles scattered around. Like the ones lit in Abuelita's room, they had pictures of angels and saints on them, including the one with the Archangel Michael stepping on a bug-eyed Satan's neck. That one was my favorite. Michael with his sword held high and his shiny breastplate, even if my father said he looked too feminine and too gringo. I could hear the curandero and my father walking around the yard, praying the Our Father. Abuelita stayed in Susana's room praying, while Mama and I moved to Abuelita's room so we could see. I sat on the bed, trying to watch them through the lace curtains, wanting to hear what they were saying. Mama held me, praying in tongues like she used to when my father was at work or out with my tios. I didn't mind it because it was always in a sing-song way. At times I even understood some of the words, even though it was not in a language I had ever heard. One word I always understood was turroco, which meant holy. I did not like it at her church, with all of them running up to the front, yelling at the top of their lungs, trying to outdo each other. Even though Mama said I was her little interpreter for the language of God, I always hid under a chair during the altar call. Through the lace curtains, I could see my father following the curandero. The man walked a circle holding a small medallion of San Cristobal. The healer held it out in front of him like some kind of divining rod. The medallion was still, but began swaying when he reached a spot directly under Susana's open window near my grandmother's mesquite tree. "Here," he said. My mother came up behind me and watched what they were doing, praying under her breath, the heat from it feeling good on the top of my head. "We have to cleanse the area before we dig out the entierro. Your mother has prepared the tools. You must get them from her." I did not like the way this man ordered my father around and thought Appa was going to tell the curandero to get the tools himself, but he came back with a shovel and a galvanized metal bucket. He sat them down and looked at the healer for instructions. I had never seen my father act this way. At barbecues and parties and whenever he was working on Abuelita's house, Appa, being the eldest son, was always the one to lead his brothers, assigning the jobs, giving the orders. The curandero said, "Give me the knives and the alcohol." He placed the kitchen knives on the ground in the form of an inverted cross. My mother gasped and said, "God protect you, viejo." The curandero then poured alcohol over the knives and told my father to kneel with him. The curandero lit the ground with matches, starting a weak blue fire. He then began the Apostles' Creed with Appa joining in. As they recited their beliefs, I realized that from where they were, the cross looked right. The fire died down, and the curandero said, "It's ours now. You must dig around the entierro without disturbing it." My father got up and kicked the shovel, cutting a circle into the earth. Once he finished, the soil inside the circle collapsed, as if the ground had long been ready to unburden itself. The man sifted through the earth and rocks, then found the entierro. My father moved away as the curandero stood and cleared dirt from something in his hands. "What is it?" Appa asked. The curandero held out something square and black wrapped in plastic. "It's the picture of a man and a boy, probably you and your father." With this, Appa snatched it from the curandero. Later, my father would explain that it had indeed been a photograph of him and Papatavo. Brujo Contreras had punched 2 nails through the picture, piercing an X through the torsos of Papatavo and my father, the oldest patriarchs, crossing out our entire Izquierdo bloodline. "We must burn it," the healer said. I wouldn't doubt if the curandero put them there himself, Mama said, and turned to me. Her grip relaxed, and she said, "Good, mijo. Everything's going to be good for you now. You have to promise to Jesus, mijo, you're never going to do that. Get involved with curanderismo and brujeria." The curandero explained that my father would have to burn it himself, since he was the oldest son and closest to being the head of the household. Appa laid the portrait in the metal bucket. He poured alcohol over the entierro, lit a match, and dropped it in. It sputtered out. My father lit another, then another, his anger growing with every failure. The obscenity began slowly, under his breath, as if my father were a child saying the words for the first time. The maldiciones became more specific, directed at the Brujo Contreras down the block. In Spanish, Appa damned all of the Brujo's family to hell, where they would watch their father be eaten alive forever. The only time I had ever heard my father curse was the few times when he drank liquor, which seemed to have a different effect on him than beer. Mama covered my ears and spoke in tongues even louder, trying to drown out his cursing. Although I did not know all of the words he was saying, I could still hear him, and I understood what he meant. Papa was yelling now, the veins in his neck throbbing and thick. His head was thrown back, and I could see spit catching the light, which filtered through the thorny mesquite branches. And then I saw my father's eyes. Even in the darkness, I could tell that they were bulging. There was too much white in them. His eyes didn't look right. They looked wild, and I'd never seen him look this way, even at his angriest. Even though it frightened me to hear those things, see him this way, I could not turn away. The fire started much like Papa's cursing, slow at first, and then engulfing the entierro. As my father cursed the Brujo Contreras, fire lighting up his face, dogs in the neighborhood began to bark. At first, it was just dogs in the houses nearby, but soon all of the Zabala's dogs were howling like they do when they hear a police siren. Some of the barking was desperate but vicious, like that of little dogs who had been cornered. Through the chain link fence of the house next door, I saw Teddy Ramirez's half-breed Doberman, teeth bare, the fur on its back standing up. It barked like it wanted to get at Papa. Then it threw itself nose first into the fence, circled around, and did it again. In my head, I thanked my mother for covering my ears because the fence was jangling so close it sounded like it was crashing against the wall. I clung to her, but I could still hear, and the dogs would not stop. Under the howling, the curandero said, "They are barking because they sense the evil spirits leaving your family." "Gracias," Papa said. "Gracias a Dios." He was calmer now. My mother put my head on her lap and stroked my hair. "Shh, mijito, it's okay," she said, because I was shaking and crying now. Mama began singing in tongues, and this was the first and only time I ever understood all of what she said, not just a few words here and there. It was this, over and over, coming, not leaving, coming, not leaving, in her sad sing-song way. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question for you both. Just to chat. There's obviously been a lot of articles written, interviews given about this idea of, for the last, 50, 60 years, however many years, people have been writing in English and Spanish in our country, and how up until very recently, all Spanish words were translated or italicized within our writing. I'll share my bias a little bit about that it shouldn't happen. But what are your thoughts on that larger discussion about translation or even italicization, right? Italicization. Yeah. I mean, because it's a big deal. There was a big article in the New Yorker, I think, recently about.
I haven't read that article.
Yeah,
I need to read that.
But you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So with authors, and if you go back to 50, 60 years, and Chicanos, Latinos, whatever word you want to use to describe us, right? With respect, of course. We've been taught to do that. Like, we were taught to do that in the very beginning. When you read, even as recent as the 2000s, you read a book. I'm reading a book by Ixta Maya Murray right now, Locas, and it was written, in the late 90s, and she italicized. So it was something that we were taught to do. But for me as an author, it really does two things, and I think both of them are harmful. One is it others the language, and my work, and we have to balance how much Spanish do I read or write, because you understand that you're writing a story that for someone who may not speak Spanish. And so I made it very early on. Even as far back as the first story in '97 or so when I started writing, I made the choice very early on not to do that. Because for me, number one is going back to my 2 points, is it others, and the other thing that it does is it places emphasis on the word where it's not intended to be. because what's the whole purpose of italics, right?
Emphasis.
It's for emphasis, and so by doing that, you're either consciously or subconsciously placing an emphasis on a word that it's called translanguaging, where you use Spanish and English or whatever other language in English, two languages together, where a word may not do in one language, so you use that other word. And so you'll read in my book that there's certain words that you can't translate into English, so the speakers, the narrators, the characters will use those languages. And the other thing too and this is kind of the third point, is that I look at it metaphorically with italics, is that the Spanish words deserve, I mean, what is italics? What are the words? They actually lean over, right? So to me, that's a metaphor for laborers. And my point is that the words actually need to, they deserve to stand up straight and not be stooped over and doing the work for you as the reader. And so I think we bring something to that, in that those words should be standing up straight alongside their English counterparts.
Graphic ambiguity.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not touching that. That's so good.
Yeah, and the really interesting
Let
part
it
about
stand
the
up,
article
man.
too is it dealt not only into Spanish, but it delved into Asian American writers and their language, and it really did talk about this otherness that Ruben spoke about, this outside of language.
And it's like so I one of my favorite authors is Jupa Lahiri, right? And I believe the language is Bengali, and I could be wrong about the actual dialect that she writes in. And she doesn't do it at all. And you read other authors, Cormac McCarthy. If you read his, All the Pretty Horses, you read his trilogy, even not on the road, but even his recent work where he uses Spanish, he doesn't do it either. And so I'm like, if that's not his native language, Cormac McCarthy's native language, and it's mine, even though I'm Pocho and I don't speak Spanish as well as I speak English, I shouldn't have to do it either. But going back to the Jupa Lahiri, is that I don't understand that language, but I understand reading, and I understand how context works, and sometimes I don't have to know a word to know the meaning, if that makes sense. And so I read her books, and I'm like, I understand what's happening here. I don't have to Google to get the intent of what she's saying. I can read into the intent of her words.
The only thing I'll say, maybe to add to that, is I feel like if you had a book where you were going to throw in 2 or 3 words, in non-English, maybe you could get away with that. But one of the things that I noticed in your work, which you just read to us, I actually loved how the interchange between English and Spanish was just really natural. It was conversational. It was, because I've been in those contexts, right, where people switch back and forth very naturally. It's actually a terrible burden to put italicization on that that entire language, which is going to hold, I don't know, maybe 10% of the novel, and it becomes inhibiting, I think. Yeah. It becomes a barrier to communication. And I think maybe that's one thing that's been changing over time, right? Our comfort, switching back and forth, and our willingness to switch back and forth unapologetically, right? And if you see it all, and it has the same color on the page, it's the end of segregation, right? Between these languages that they're both just as important to us, and often in the stories that we tell, they hold just as much weight.
Yeah.
And this allows them to do that.
Right.
I noted as a non-Spanish speaker reading in your book, I haven't read it all, but excerpts to get a feel for you, that I'm more inclined to reference a work when it isn't offset graphically, because I just sort of assume, I don't get the sentence without that word, and sometimes the context makes it clear, but other times I'm running through a dictionary, Where if it were italicized, I might say, oh, other language not for me, which is of course the low bar, lazy reader in me. But I have two readers. You know, I have the reader who just wants to keep going without running for a reference book. Then there's the other reader who fancies himself smart boy, who thinks, oh, I should learn these words.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, you know, I looked up in the portions of your book that I read, I looked up probably 2/3 of the Spanish words because I couldn't. And then I thought, oh, that's a word that there's no English correlate for.
Yeah, there's no.
But then a lot of the immigrant families that I've grown up with, we experience what David described in his story, these language things in family, this conglomeration of languages reflecting each person's perspective about that culture.
That's right.
You know, the question comes in one language, the answer comes in a different one.
I think you bring up a good point, is that the authors should not, the author should not, by changing language, changes culture. And the author should not change language so that to do the reader's work for them, because that alters the heart of what the stories, the language itself is the culture itself. It's the story themselves. And by changing it for the reader changes the actual content and heart of what's being relayed through story, through narrative.
Sure.
Some of us think language and culture are inseparable.
It's true.
I think so.
I believe it.
I believe it.
I believe it too. And the other thing too, like we you know, a bilingual author you have to make very conscious choices. And so if I put a Spanish word in there, it's no accident that it's there, right? Because I have to make that choice. And when I speak to people, I have to make that choice, whether I'm going to use that word or not use that word. I mean, we all do that. That's just how language works. But the other idea behind that is that if I were to actually write how my people speak where I'm from, there would be about 60-70% more Spanish in the book if I were to do that. So in understanding that I'm writing a story that is universal. It's about family dynamics, it's about trauma, it's about heartache, it's about loss. We all can understand those things, right? But at the same time, I'm putting it in a culturally specific setting and with characters that I'm writing for everyone, but I'm writing to my people, if that makes sense. And so that's the balance as an author. Is that, you know, I have to put things in context because I want you to understand. But if I think it's not a word that is going to change the meaning or your understanding of the story, I just let it ride. I just have to do that.
Cool. Thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you.
It was a great,
and thanks for having us
great
here.
storytelling.
Beautiful story.
Thank you.
We appreciate that.
Yeah.